It's been a couple of days. Here we are. I've had an upgrade to the audio and video, so if you notice a discrepancy in the footage, then this isn't Hollywood Productions here. Come on. Anyway, back to the rock here. That's the important thing. It's been about 48 hours. As you can see, it's pretty dry. It's pretty hard. We're nowhere near to full strength yet. But I need this thing out of the way. So we need to take a little step here, and then we need to put it into storage for the better part of a month. You could, as I mentioned, cut it short to 2 weeks. Ideally though, give it a month. Right now, all I need to do is do any major refining that I need to do in terms of reshaping. If you need to, you need to scrape and sand the whole thing down eventually. I like to do that a little bit later. But the bottom edge, for example, is going to have some inconsistencies. And if there's anything that's kind of thin or feathered edge or anything that might chip or break in the future, I want to scrape or grind that off now so that when I paint it, if it, I don't want to, deal with a chip in the future that, doesn't look very good anyway. Bottom line, just scrape and sand the bottom because I said so. Moving on. That's all it takes to break it free. Remember at the beginning I made that executive decision to flip the board and not sculpt on plastic, which was a good idea. It breaks right free of that. I didn't, I hardly put any effort in there at all. And that's it. And so it's free of the board. I could take it and move it away. But before I do that, I'm going to, do a little thing here first. It looks really thick there, but maybe you remember, I remember there was some foam missing. The foam was just random and all weather worn and chewed up from insects and stuff, and it was all messed up. So there's a little bit of a thick spot there, but I don't mind a little bit of thickness at the bottom. Like if there's anywhere you're going to have a little extra thickness in terms of your mortar, for sure at the bottom gives it a little bit extra stability and a little bit extra strength. What I don't want to see, if I want to go ahead and point out my flaws, is stuff like this thin spot there. It's definitely good enough for sure, but if I could have had it, see how this side is nice and even? Much better. I much prefer that, but this is a handmade product and you're going to have some inconsistencies there. So anyway, what I want to show you here is you take something like this. This is a scraping stone. They're pretty useful for larger pieces, or if you do a lot of this kind of work, you can definitely benefit by having one of those tools. They're available at hardware stores. If you take a look around, you can probably find one. They're not ideal for small sculpture, decorative concrete stuff, in my opinion. It's just a little bit bulky of an instrument. I want a little bit more fine detail, so I choose like a rasp or a file or something like that. It can be something fairly aggressive with the bite. It doesn't matter. It's going to wear off anyway. And all you do is kind of just run along these edges. Not sure how close the camera gets in on that, but there's all these little crumbly bits along the edges, and I want to take all of that off. And I could just manually go along, but it'll make it look bad. Whereas if you kind of run the edge with something like this or something like that, you can make something that's going to be you don't want to round it all the way in, but you want to again take off anything that's in danger of breaking off in the future. And before I do that, I'm just going to go ahead and throw on a mask. It only takes a minute to do, but I want to take every opportunity to not breathe in all that cement and silica there. So I'm not going to bother with the full half mask like my friend back here. Okay. We need to do more work to that. More sanding and these little edges and stuff like that. But I like to do that stuff once the product is much more cured. I find I get a better detail when I do that. Right now this cement is still weak, and instead of allowing me to sand or grind the aggregates to a smoother finish, the cement kind of just fails, and I rip the grain of sand out from the little Portland that it's sitting in, and so I get a rough texture. And so that's why I like to do something like that once, at least 30, at least 2 weeks, 30 days ideally. So I'm going to put this guy in storage. I did that major reshaping now because it's not that strong, so it's easy to grind off, any parts that are too high, anything like that. Later on, you can do it. It just takes a little bit more elbow grease. Okay, so that's it. Stick this guy in storage, and we will see you back maybe in about 28 days or so. You can tell it gets lighter and lighter as it goes. I thought of something else. Wait. Oh, wait, there's more. So, you can see how lightly colored it is here. It's freshly poured. It's thirsty for hydration. So let's go ahead and you can see the concrete is very thirsty. It readily absorbs that water. It wants the hydration. It's good for it. It's something that you should do regularly for the curing of the concrete. And I find that the pieces that I take the time to wet cure like this, the finish on them seems to paint better. I lack the ability to explain to you on a technical level why it is, but I do notice it. If I had two of these right next to each other and I soaked one down like this a bunch of times throughout the curing process versus one I did not do that to, when I painted them, I will fail to achieve the same depth of character of color in the unmoistened cured concrete versus the one that I take the time to wet down. It does something to that surface layer, and I notice that it's whiter. Like it's a lighter gray finish versus this one, which will have kind of a mottled, darker gray color. Again, I can't explain to you why, but I know it to be true. So definitely moist curing is something to think about. Something I'm going to do, something you should do with something like this if you've made any kind of cast concrete or hand sculpted concrete products. Enough about this thing. I'll see you later. Here we are, a short while later. Ta-da! It's a rock, right? All done, except we're not done yet. We're going to do some painting to it, and it's going to make it look even better. As you can see, when it dries, it loses all of that fantastic texture detail that we imprinted. It just kind of looks, in person it looks a little bit better. From years of doing this on camera, no matter how high definition I record it or take pictures, it just fails to represent the detail of the texture, especially when we get into the paint job, because the paint job is a multi-layered paint job, giving depth and character to the coloration, and something that you just can't really pick up well on in pictures. In person, looks very convincing. It still looks convincing on camera, but just not as convincing as it looks in person. Anyway, moving along. So today is going to be scraping, grinding, sanding, all of that stuff. Everything that we need to do to it to make it its finished version before we paint it. We don't want to find a defect or some little piece that we need to break off after we've painted it, because we're going to change the color and then you're going to see that base color through. We're going to be doing a gray base anyway, so you wouldn't see it too much, but still it's a deficiency and we want to avoid that. So we're going to be using a file to take down a lot of these high points. What kind of file? Whatever you can find. Whatever it's supposed to be used for probably is not grinding down concrete, but it works great for it. And let me find a problem here. There's a problem on... Actually, there's problems everywhere, so I guess we'll just start with this bottom edge is very important, because you see how as I'm doing here, I'm putting it up on edge to facilitate lifting, moving, that kind of stuff. You'll do the same thing all the time once you own it, because it's a big, heavy rock. So if you're going to lose a piece of that edge because it's weak or it's flared out and feathered too thin, take it off now. It has to come off now. So be aggressive with, the file is the tool for that. Or you can use, I think this is called a grinding stone. I've seen them in pretty much every hardware store. They're usually in like the, concrete working section. But now that you know what it looks like as well, you can keep your eyes open for it. Not expensive, good for larger pieces, but it's a very aggressive tool to use for any kind of fine detail. So that's kind of why I've ended up with the file. I find I get a little more fine detail with it. But the bottom edge, I did already, so it's pretty good already. stuff like this, you can't see it, but there's a ridge here. I can feel it and I can see it like when I'm up close like this, and I don't want it there. A lot of the times with this process, it's you use feel as much as you use sight to tell when it's done. There's a certain tack that the concrete has. You can feel it. Your hand drags. It's got a lot of friction there. Even if there's no deficiencies that I need to file away, pretty much the entire thing is going to get a very light pass with, it doesn't have to be 220 grit, but probably something in this range is pretty good. If I had 400, I'd use it. I'd use 180. I probably wouldn't use 100 because by that point it's so aggressive. You're leaving like aggressive little swirl lines, and it's not what we're going for. We're just trying to smooth out the texture. So again, right now, as I draw my hand across the top, there's a lot of friction there, a lot of pull, and this will get rid of that. I'm not going to do it yet because I'm going to put on a mask, and you should put on a mask as well when you're grinding and sanding concrete. So yeah, I think that's pretty much it. We're going to grind it, we're going to sand it, and then we got to get rid of all that dust that's on it. You don't want to paint on top of that. And so we'll cover that when we get to it. Right now, I'm going to go get the mask, and we're going to get started here.